This is my 1986 Monte Carlo SS. For this video, I'll be detailing the process to remove and repair the tachometer. My tachometer currently is not registering anything at idle, and then also at various RPMs is not registering correctly as well. So for this process, I'll be detailing the removal of this decorative bezel and the sub bezel, this window bezel. And just note that once you get to that point of removing the second sub bezel, that you'll be able to remove the tachometer with 2 screws. I will then go further in terms of the process of removing the speedometer and the third sub bezel, and that is really just more as a follow-up to the LED light bulb replacement that I did in a previous video. And I'll link this video as far as the removal procedure to get at the third sub bezel and subsequently the lighting. But again, just note that this procedure you can stop at the second sub bezel, this window sub bezel, and then there's just 2 screws for the tack, and you can pull that out. You don't need to pull out the speedometer or the third sub bezel. I am simply doing that again as just a follow-up to show the removal process for those that are encouraged to do the light bulb replacement, or for that matter might need to do a speedometer replacement. Okay, this is my 1986 Monte Carlo SS. For this video, I'm going to highlight what it takes to correct the tachometer not reading correctly. Unfortunately, I discovered this issue after I'd already done the LED backlight upgrade. Optimally, it would have been nice to discover this when I had everything apart, but this will give me an opportunity to show you the tools necessary to remove the assembly, and also just some of the areas to consider to make the disassembly and repair a smooth process. Okay, so for the tools, it's a 7/32 nut driver, 9/32 nut driver, a pair of hemostats or tweezers or needle nose. This is specifically if you have a column shift, and I'll go through that. If you don't have a column shift, obviously there's no consideration for the cabling for that. A 5/32 Allen wrench. This is for the side mirror. And then Phillips driver. I have both a long and a stubby. The stubby is for one that's right underneath the column. It's just a little difficult to get at with a long screwdriver. And then last, for the sub bezel, a 10mm socket that I have on just a nut driver. So we're going to go through this in a little condensed fashion. I'm not going to go through each removal because I've got everything apart, and this will expedite it, but also help since it's not very easy when you're a one-man operation to videotape and actually perform the disassembly. Okay, for the front bezel assembly, there's 7 Phillips head screws. They're all the same size, so you don't have to worry about separating them or categorizing them. Simply 4 points on the bottom, and then there's 3 up on the top. This is the one in the center that I told you I used the stubby for. It's just a little hard to get at with the column. Okay, again, since mine is a column shift, to make the front bezel assembly removal easy, I have the gear shift all the way down, and I have a tilt wheel, so I have it tilted down to make the removal of this easy. For the headlamp control, I have this unbolted now, but there's no need to remove the front control as the hole in the front bezel is big enough for this to slip through. If you have a defrost, this is just simply an easy plug removal. You just squeeze these tabs, pull it out. For the side mirror, passenger mirror, this is where the 5/32 Allen wrench, so on the bezel itself, you'll see this collar. There is a small 5/32 Allen head set screw, so just loosen that up and that'll slide right through. One ancillary item that I usually consider taking off or just getting out of the way because it usually falls off is just this gasket. This gasket is just used to help not allow the light to diffuse or bleed through the instrument panel, depending upon which light is illuminating here. So I usually just take that off, set it off to the side. Then we'll go through the other items that we need to remove around the perimeter of the first sub bezel. So we have to remove the vent side vent here, there's a 9/32 screw, so we pull that out. I've already got it loosened. This will expose a screw, a 7/32 screw for the sub bezel that you need to remove, and then also the 3 9/32 screws for the headlamp that also exposes this third sub bezel screw here. So pull that out. Then, since again mine is a column shift, there are 2 screws, one here and one here. You need to pull this out of the way because there is a screw underneath the column shift indicator on this second sub bezel. And then for the column shift indicator, as I indicated, I use my hemostats to remove this cable to get this out of the way. Okay, so this is just to show the routing of the cabling for the column shift indicator. So this just routes through this hole. There's a slot that comes through here, comes over the front, and then just hooks onto the end here. If you'll notice, there's a plate actually that sandwiches behind this and actually goes up behind here. So in GM's infinite wisdom, obviously they had an overdrive transmission, so you can clearly see the reason why this plate is sandwiched beneath this. One thing to note, in order to make this easy to get this off with a pair of tweezers or hemostats, as I used, is I put the column shift all the way upright in the park position to give this the most amount of slack, and then it's pretty easy to remove. But this exposes the bolts for the sub bezel, so there's one underneath that's hidden underneath this assembly. There's another one that's on the side of this secondary sub bezel assembly that was the one that's exposed by removing the vent. The other one is on this corner here, and then there's one on the bottom here, and then another one down here. A couple things to note in terms of the special length of some of the bolts. So this is a longer bolt for the second sub bezel that is placed here. And then also I noticed for the headlight switch, this longer one here actually goes here. The 2 shorter ones are here and here for the headlamp assembly. Okay, with the column gear shift lever down its lowest position and the screws removed from the second sub bezel, we can now pull this out of the way. This is important because it exposes the 10mm fastener that's underneath here that needs to come off for the last or third sub bezel assembly. There's one here. There's another one through this hole behind here, and then another one here. Okay, so once you remove the 4 10mm perimeter fasteners for the third sub bezel assembly, you'll notice that this is still not willing to come forward, and that's because there's a speedometer cable that's behind here. There's a spring mechanism that you feel on the lowest portion of the speedometer. If you push that inward as you're pulling out, it will release the speedometer cable, and you should be able to move this forward. One thing to note also too that I didn't show in the video is I removed the headlight switch, as it just makes it easier to get this cable through once you're pulling this third sub bezel assembly off. So with that cable now released, you should be able to pull this last or third sub bezel assembly off. This is the speedometer cable here, and let's see if we can get a picture of the fastener. So this is what you're feeling in the back here. So just push down on this as you're pulling back on the bezel, and then if you'll notice, there's this speed sensor that you'll need a nut driver, 7/32 nut driver. You need to pull that off too to finish pulling the bezel off. Okay, a couple things to note is that the mirror the passenger side mirror cable. Just make sure you carefully route that through when pulling this last third sub bezel assembly off. And then also the cable for the defroster that goes through here. And then last, I don't know if maybe somebody was in here before, but these bolts that actually hold on the tack are 1/4 inch, so that adds a 1/4 inch driver to the set of tools. So there's two of those bolts here, one here and one here. This is a push-on style connection, so you simply just, there's a little bit of tension and you simply just lift it off, and there it is. There's the tack. So we'll get into a little bit of the details now in terms of the repair to make the tachometer read correctly. So there are 3 8mm fasteners that hold the tachometer circuit board to the back of the tack. You need to remove those. And that's going to expose the problem area. This is the resistor pack that I'll get into in terms of testing and how to service this. Okay, the integrated circuit that we're going to focus on is actually a film resistor pack. This is just a schematic of that integrated circuit itself. The resistor that typically causes the problem is resistor number 4. It should read 200K. Mine was about 240K when I measured it. So the tools that you'll need to actually perform this repair is a decent high wattage precision or pen type soldering iron, some good rosin core solder, 60/40 is good, some small side cutters as I indicated to cut pins 4 and 10 of the film resistor integrated circuit. And I use solder wick to actually remove the solder from the pins. You can use a solder sucker too, but it's usually a little bit more aggressive and can damage the area. And then of course some 200K resistors. I bought actually a pack of 100 of these from Amazon. A vendor had these for $3.95 for 100 of them, so it's a pretty good deal. Okay, so this is the film resistor integrated circuit, this black and white chip here. As you can see, I've already cut with some small side cutters the appropriate pins. I wanted to cut them to accurately measure the resistor in the integrated circuit, so it's resistor 4. As you can see, this pin represents pin number 10, and this pin on this side that you can see I cut represents pin number 4 from the schematic that I showed before. So you can see from pin 4 to pin 10 across, this IC is where you want to measure, and it should measure no more than 200K resistance. Mine was again about 240K. So using my digital multimeter with the pins cut and the film resistor isolated in the chip, this is the measurement I took, and I said it was about 240K, so definitely not the 2K that we're looking for. So I'm hoping that this is going to resolve the issue once we replace it with the 1/4 watt 2K resistor. So for the wattage, I chose a 1/4 watt resistor. This is a small package. So essentially you're cutting out the resistor out of the integrated circuit pack by cutting pin 4 and pin 10, and then just putting the 200K resistor in place of what the IC was doing. So as you can see, I just soldered that into the bottom after I desoldered the pins that I cut out of there. So we'll put this back in and assemble it and test it out. Okay, so buttoning up the tachometer, I've got the module bolted back onto the back of the tack, and the tack back in the third sub-assembly. And just a couple of things to note. This filter easily falls off, so just need to make sure you place that back on. You can see it's larger on one side, so it only goes one way. I've got the wiring for the defroster through, and I've also got the cabling for the passenger mirror. and the wiring through for the headlights. In terms of getting the speedometer cable back on, this is a little bit of a trick, but essentially what you need to do is pinch the speedometer. You probably can't get a good view of this. Pinch the speedometer between your two fingers and place it. You can by feel on the back of the connector on the back of the speedometer, and then push it forward to lock it in place. You'll feel it lock or snap into place with that spring-loaded tab in the back once it's in position. And then I'll finish buttoning this up, and we'll start it up and test the result. One important note is, obviously, since mine is a column shift, is to have the cable through this opening when you place the bezel back in. Okay, so for this base assembly, I've got the 4 10mm bolts or fasteners in place, and now we're going to put on the secondary bezel cover over this area, as you can't tighten this one down with that bezel over that, so you need to make sure that this fastener is in here first. Okay, so remember that the longer of the 4 goes in the corner here. For some of these fasteners, it can be very difficult to get back here and hang on to the fastener without it dropping down. What I've done here is just simply taken some tape, put it inside the driver to make the fitting of the fastener snug, so that basically if I hold it horizontally, it's not going to fall out. So this is just an easy way so that I can get this in this hole without it falling down. And then don't forget the one that's actually behind the gear shift indicator. You have to get that one in, and then you can put the gear shift indicator over it with these 2 fasteners here. And then last, you've got the single screw for the duct piece that goes in, and then the 3 screws for the light switch. And then don't forget the gasket that keeps the light, depending upon what you have activated. Say for instance, if you have the brights activated, this will prevent the light from bleeding in to the other indicators that are on the front of the bezel. If you don't put this in, you turn on your brights, you'll see the other indicators or the other windows slightly illuminated because the light will bleed through. So make sure you put that back in. And then the 3 screws that mount on the top side of the outer bezel, these are held in with these metal tabs. These are kind of a pain in the butt. At least the center one is kind of a pain. I try and line that one up first and then do the outer ones next. The ones in the bottom perimeter are pretty straightforward, and I didn't have any trouble with those. So. And then last, we'll fire it up to check it out.